throw you this one, see what you make of this one. Anybody, what makes the Beatles music so special and so enduring?
You know, for me, listening to the Beatles as a totality, what always strikes me is the distance they covered in such a short amount of time. If you look at Love Me Do, as simple as can be in 1962, and Strawberry Fields, extremely complicated, only 4 years later. And here you had four guys who were self-taught, intuitive musicians, no technical background to speak of, just sort of picked up their instruments, learned their repertoire, you know, from American records, and began writing their own things, and suddenly got to Strawberry Fields and beyond. And to me, that's just sort of a miracle. You know?
Yes. For me, one of the miracles is something that there is a gentleman called Ken Townsend, who was a maintenance engineer, electronics engineer, on the very first session the Beatles ever did. And he continued on through and eventually became manager of the EMI Studios. And he got an MBE, I think he was.
Yes, that's right.
MBE.
Same as the Beatles.
Yes. He, in a recent interview, came up with something that fascinated me. And just in case I had the opportunity, I had to write it out tonight. From the date the Beatles first started to record, September 4th, 1962, through January 4th, 1970, which was their last recording, they recorded 212 songs, which comes out to be 13 and a half days between each song written and recorded. Ask an artist these days to do something like that, and they'll just burst out laughing. There was an immediacy for the Beatles which was incredible. Their whole training period in Germany, playing 3 shows a night, 6 nights a week, I think it was, just
6 hours a night.
yes.
Typically.
No artist these days would do that.
Yeah.
Plus, they were coming out with albums so quickly.
It's that incredible, you could call it a work ethic that they developed in Hamburg, that they were constantly producing, and as Allan says, they were constantly progressing. And I think the reason for the progress was their incredible curiosity, that they began as craftsmen. They learned to hone the Chuck Berry licks, the Duane Eddy licks, and put them into their own compositions. They started to write their own songs. And then they started to just pick up everything they heard from every walk of life in terms of music, every style, all around the world. They would find ways to bring that into what they were doing. And so they were developing this incredible craft at the same time that their imaginations were just taking off, that they were becoming artists instead of just simple craftsmen turning out the same song. And there would be ideas in their songs that would recur, but they were really hidden. They were things that I've spent my life trying to uncover. For instance, could I play an example?
Please do.
One of my favorite sounds of all time is the opening chord of A Hard Day's Night, which I can play right here. Now that is, McCartney is playing a D on the bass, Lennon is playing an F chord on his guitar, which has nothing to do with D, D has nothing to do with F, and Harrison is playing an F chord with a G on top. G has no part of either of those fundamental sonorities, but they all work as an arresting sound, and they were always looking for a gotcha idea to get a song across from its first moment. And people think, oh, well, what an unusual sound, but they used it again. And as an example here, I've got the introduction to I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. And The Hard Day's Night is in there. Same arrangement, D in the bass, F chord, F with a G on top. But I've had to repeat the chord 5 times. Otherwise it would go by, you wouldn't notice it. But see if you can hear The Hard Day's Night chord in Spoil the Party when I repeat it. formulas, but there are little things that they would learn from themselves, and as they were constantly changing.
Do you have any idea of how they came up with that? I mean, that strange combination of notes that don't really belong together, and yet they made something very special.
Right. George Martin was right there when it happened. He plays piano to boot on the same chord. But I don't think there was any conscious intention. McCartney knew the song was in G major, and so a D would be a logical upbeat to begin a song in G major. But I think it was George was asked about what is Paul playing, and he said, I don't know, you'd have to ask him. So, George is credited with the guitar because the 12-string that he plays is...
So why would they have played an F for a song in G?
Yeah, well, if you want to get into musical technical detail, Lennon sings a lot of F in the song, which is not part of the G major scale, but he brings a very blue quality. The Beatles were getting very into blues in early '64. You hear it in Harrison's guitar in '63, but not many other places in their singles. But then Can't Buy Me Love. McCartney just turned to blues, and they turned a corner there. And so they were bringing in that lowered 7th scale degree, F in the key of G, in a lot of Hard Day's Night in their early '64 recordings. So, you know, Lennon was after that bluesy edge, and maybe that's where that came from, but they never talk about those really interesting nitty-gritty musical fact type things.
Probably because they don't realize what they are, of course. And I'm pretty sure a lot of that was just purely accidental.
They go
Oh yeah, that sounds good, we'll keep it.
Yeah, but they had that inquisitiveness to go looking for it.
They wanted everything to be different all the
Yeah.
time. They never wanted something to sound the same.
A key part of that would be, as you say, Alan, that they had no formal musical education. And they'd grown up through the British school system in the 1950s, where music lessons at school were very strictly classical and dead boring. I mean, because I actually had those kind of lessons myself, and you probably did as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's almost enough to kill the interest in music for someone, let alone inspire it.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
John joked about when William Mann wrote his piece at the end of 1963 about the Aeolian cadences and the Beatles.
Diatonic clusters.
Pan-diatonic clusters. Lennon said, Aeolian cadences, that sounds like some kind of exotic bird. That's all they wanted to know about.
Yeah. Although that was an extraordinary piece in itself, the Beatles' own way of handling it was to pick on its vocabulary and make light of it, and they just thought it was a great joke, but actually it was a tremendous honour when you really look at it now from a period of 50 years on, that in the Times newspaper, the classical music columnist, who wrote a column for musicians, it wasn't for general readership, it was for musicians, for him to say in 1963 that two untutored guys from Liverpool, England, pop guys, were the outstanding composers of the year, was an extraordinarily bold statement. They were embarrassed by it, but I mean, looking back on it, you have to say that William Mann, who wrote it, was really ahead of his time in spotting how good their songs were.
And if you consider the British classical composers who were still alive at the time, Benjamin Britten for starters, I wonder what he thought of that.
Yeah, I can't imagine, but that's the name that came to my mind first. It's very, very big.
For this new book of mine, I actually tracked down the guy who Paul McCartney had music lessons, piano lessons, in 1958. So he's already playing with John, and now he's going off for music lessons at his dad's suggestion. And he went for these lessons, and the teacher was a young guy, but already qualified, and he could tell that Paul was racing ahead. He didn't want to be bogged down with detail, didn't actually want to learn the dots. He just wanted to know, he wanted to have the music written out in like chord symbols, like it would be for a guitar. And there were about 5 lessons, and then Paul gave it up and went off to become, one of the greatest musicians of all time, without actually having had a proper education in it.
Do you think it would have hampered him if he had actually learned?
Yes, for me, absolutely. It was that not knowing what's going on allowed them to try things that I always have this thing about other engineers, that there are some that came from a technical background. I came from the complete opposite. At EMI, you were trained not to be an electronics wizard. They just wanted you interested in the sound. And there are too many engineers that won't do something because, well, if I turn that knob that much, it's going to overload capacitor C1, which will cause harmonic distortion on the film. If it sounds good, do it. That's how come they got the distortion, the revolution on the album. It was overloading the desks that we used to use to record on. If they'd known what was going on, they would never have done that. It was just, let's try it. And that's what they were about all the time, trying everything.
Yeah. The byword for the Beatles really is to resist anybody telling you that you can't do it.
Yes.
You know, if anyone said you can't do that, then they would say, well, we will then. That was their attitude, and through that came so much because they just broke every rule.
That's exactly the way McCartney says he came up with the additions he made to George Martin's arrangement for the Yesterday String Quartet.
Yeah.
He wanted to hear the cello play an E flat at one point, and Martin said, no, Bach would never do that. McCartney said, well, we're doing it then. And that same effect comes up in Penny Lane right after the Bach trumpet, and the same effect comes in the Blackbird, which McCartney says he started as a Bach piece on guitar.
Yes, that's right.
So it's like McCartney having to get his own voice in there. Don't say it's Bach, it's McCartney.
Yes. Can you, at many of these recording sessions, obviously you had a job to do as well, but still you were around the guys when it was happening, we were not. What was it like to be in that environment where so much creativity was taking place?
It's what happened every day. At the time, it was nothing special.
Yeah.
We never realised that 40, 50 years on, we'd still be talking about it. And we'd forgotten most of it. That's the problem, because it was so unimportant to us at the time. There's something I've been asked about a lot is I was the engineer when Clapton came in to play the guitar solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I don't remember a thing about it. For my book, I actually tried hypnotherapy to basically remember the sessions. Of course it didn't work, so myself and my co-writer went and spoke to Chris Collins, who was George Martin's assistant and was actually producing those sessions. And John Smith, who was my second engineer at the time, they don't remember it either.
Right.
It wasn't special. It's only in looking back and it becoming history, it becomes special.
Mm. But all the same, I understand all that completely. In fact, several of your colleagues told me that they really didn't want to work on Beatles sessions because these sessions would drag on for hours. The Beatles tended to record at night, and most of them had families or whatever, and they didn't want to be working all through the night. So they would be assigned the Beatles and go, oh no, not the Beatles, somebody else.
Well, hence the two engineers new engineers being put on their sessions. Before me was Jeff Emmerich, who he'd been an engineer for 6 months before being put on their sessions. And it was because the older guys wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. And then when Jeff got fed up working with them, I was sat behind the board. The first session I ever did behind the board and pushing up the faders was Your Mother Should Know. And I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I'd never done it before. So my whole training, my whole learning process was with the biggest band in the damn world.
Let's take this back a bit. Walter, you've been looking into some of the early songs that the Beatles wrote, or Lennon and McCartney wrote, I should say. And in a way, there's a nice example I know you have of how Paul McCartney's, one of his earliest songs actually harks back to a song that his dad used to play. Because the Beatles also predate rock and roll, don't they?
Right, okay, so, Mark is talking about a song that Paul Whiteman recorded in 1927 called I'll Build a Stairway to Paradise. And it turns out that the introduction for that record is sped up a good bit and becomes the opening of Like Dreamers Do, which we know at the earliest from the 1962 Decca audition. But there's a funny moment in the making of the anthology where George turns to Paul and they were listening to Like Dreamers Do, And George says, "Oh, that's your old man. That's that Paul Whiteman Stairway to Paradise thing, isn't it?" So I'll play and see if you can hear the relationship. Now, the Paul Whiteman goes very slowly, the Like Dreamers do goes very quickly, but they're the same chords, which in A major would be E, C, F, C sharp, F sharp, D, G, E flat, A flat, E, A. That go up sort of like a rising step of fourths. So now you've all got that in your ears. Let's see. What was the number on that, Mark? You know?
No, I didn't know.
Let's see. Stairway. Oh, here we go. Okay, so first up, Paul Whiteman. Speed that progression up, this is what you get. It was, the Whiteman was just one of many songs from the 20s that McCartney's father would play at parties, and would, I guess, encourage Paul, why don't you play that song?
And Like Dreamers Do, I won't give it away entirely, but it actually turns out to be one of the most important songs in the Beatles catalogue. In my new book, I actually explain how it got them their EMI recording contract with George Martin. So without Paul Whiteman and George Gershwin, who wrote that tune, of course, possibly no Beatles.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. They really did predate rock and roll, and a lot of their influence was obviously American music, but it also came from listening to the BBC in England, which, because it had one music channel on the radio, well, you do that. But
it was terrible.
But the BBC, well, we had one music channel, right? It was called the Light Programme, and they had to play music for the entire public. They couldn't just cater for young people.
But they weren't interested in young people at that point.
Well, young people almost didn't really have their own music at this point anyway. So the BBC played a diet of pretty much everything. And what you hear in the Beatles catalogue is pretty much everything. It's all in there from the 1920s onwards. All the things that they were exposed to as children, it all feeds into the Beatles canon.
Well, the thing about that song that intrigued me when I heard George, Tom, and Paul, that was I'd always heard it as a parody of Elvis. Paul just sings with an Elvis voice through that song, and that's what I used to hear with my Like Dreamers do. So yeah, it's a collection of all these different things they've heard, and you just place them together.
There's an degree to which they nicked ideas a lot. You know, that, which I hadn't really noticed before, and you know, things like Do You Want to Know a Secret from Wishing Well, and then finally when he sort of forgot to disguise it sufficiently, it's come together from You Can't Catch Me. And there was in the Rolling Stone interview that John Lennon gave in 1970, there was a section that's in the audio version of the interview that didn't get into the book because he basically says it was off the record, where he says, you know, yes, of course I stole it. That's how I write. I have an idea of, you know, a song that I'm interested in, and I change the words and I change the tune, and then it's my song. You know, and that's one way to compose. I mean, it's not the way they always did it, but it's something that I think he did a bunch. Run for Your Life, I'd Rather See You Dead, Little Girl and the Beautiful Other Man, right out of that Elvis track that Day Let's Play House, which is one of the tracks we have a bit of the Quarrymen doing the day that John and Paul met. Yeah. So all these things go way back.
But I think all that just goes to show that, as we said at the beginning, they were tremendous at absorbing everything around them and then creating something new from it. And as you say, there were just one or two moments when they didn't disguise it very well. I like the fact also they were open about it. Paul McCartney did an interview in 1964 when he brought up the fact that the bass line in I Saw Her Standing There is a complete steal from Chuck Berry's Talking About You. Just that we played the same bass line, it fitted, so we used it. I mean, they didn't have to say that so openly. recently. No one had really picked up on that.
You know, and then it went beyond that, because Drive My Car, basic automotive song, the bass line and essential progression became Jimi Hendrix's Crosstown Traffic, which is also very automotive. You know, if you listen to those two songs, it's another thing I like about the 60s, is there's so much cross-fertilization.
And the beat, 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 those dissonant vocals in Drive My Car, that's like Chuck Berry's Maybelline.
Mm-hmm.
Bent guitar horn, car horns on guitar. Yeah, that's...
You would have worked on that, Ken, wouldn't you? Drive My Car?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was Eric Clapton on that as well? Yeah.
Actually, I think it was Chuck Berry was actually.
What about the role of George Martin in all of this? I mean, you certainly witnessed this at close quarters for some time.
For the longest time, I gave no credit to George. I came in on Hard Day's Night. By that time, they were already sort of starting to take off in their own direction. He was having less to do with them. And as it went on, the White Album, he even went on vacation for a couple of weeks to Greece whilst we were doing it. And I thought, a lot of times I thought, what the hell are you doing here? You're just up in the control room, they're down there playing. Shouldn't you be telling them to do something? And it's only sort of stepping in his shoes, becoming a producer, and looking back on the way I worked, that I realised how much I picked up from him. And it's basically, you put an artist in the studio to create, and you have to allow the talent that's down there to create. And that's what he did. Always knowing that if they started to go too far afield, you can go back, you know what, I like the way you did it a bit earlier, let's go there and try it again. And that's what I saw from George, but I didn't really see him, I didn't catch on to what he was doing originally. And I say it's only since looking back on how I produce, it's exactly the same.
That was a revolutionary approach when he did that, wasn't it? Before that time, a producer would come in, he'd have the fixer line up session people, and the light would go on and they'd record.
One of the things to remember is the way music or record companies have changed. The A&R guy, who later became known as the producer, he worked for the label, and he was the artist and repertoire person. He found the artist, and he got the repertoire, which was the songs they were going to sing. And he would organise an arranger and get them to do it. George had never worked with anyone like the Beatles before, and so he was learning just the same way they were. He had more schooling, obviously, because he was no boss. And so he knew what music really made it, but it was still his turning the arrangements around for in the early days. I'm sure that was just experimenting, because he did not know what a hit record was at that point. He'd done Rolf Harris's Tiny Kangaroo Dance. He had done Charlie Drake, Mr. Custer, all basically comedy things.
Oh, but great records though.
Comedy records,
Sunrise by Rolf Harris.
Yes.
When you
But
listen
that's
to
nothing
that,
like.
no, but what it
What
has.
about Robin Hood?
But when you listen to Sunrise by Rolf Harris, I don't know how many people in this audience tonight know who Rolf Harris is, let alone Sunrise, although it was a hit in America. But what it is original. And it's an extraordinary production, actually, and it was just at the time he met them. And one of the girls who used to go down the cavern told me that she was in the car with George in '62. Girls who used to go to the cavern were really close to the Beatles, and the Beatles would give them lifts in the car and stuff like that, and Sunrise came on the radio, and George stopped the car and said, "Have you heard this? What an extraordinary track this is." And this was their producer, and they didn't know it at that point.
Fascinating.
But that's, you know, how lucky they were to find someone who was so original in the studio. Yes, it's a novelty record, but actually it's such an unusual piece.
Right.
So
once again, it was that thing of he found the arranger.
oh yeah,
The orchestra was set up by someone completely else.
the Beatles were completely an untried thing for George. I mean, he'd never worked with anybody who brought in their own songs before and said, "This is how we're going to do
The
it."
most heavy. The closest would have been Murray Paramore, who produced the English Elvis, who was a guy called Cliff Richard, who never broke over here.
No.
But there was always a battle going between George Martin and Norrie Barrymore.
Yes.
They were the opposing labels at EMI.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What's your take on George Martin? I mean, you've met him as well, haven't you? Interviewed him?
I've interviewed him a few times. I think, as generally we've been saying, that early on he was extremely important. I mean, he used to say that his specialty was intros. And if you think about, going back to, I don't know that he had that much to do about Love Me Do, apart from taking the vocal away from John and giving it to Paul for the, where John would have to switch from harmonica to vocal. That was just a practical thing. But going on to Please Please Me, I think they were playing it the way they played it live, just with the guitar intro, and it was his idea to put the harmonica on.
And to speed it up.
Yeah, and to speed it up. Early on, I think he was very influential. I mean, they did, as you say, have really strong ideas about what they wanted to do, and but he came up with a lot of these touches, and as they progressed, I think it became more collaborative around the time. We were talking about yesterday before. I mean, a lot of the most striking ideas in that arrangement, the cello line, were McCartney, but obviously he had a lot to do with what we hear in that song. And by the end, I think he largely had tuned out, partly because they really did know what they wanted to do, and they weren't that interested in his advice. I think he didn't like the atmosphere of bickering, and so he, I think, had a lot less to do with the recordings. Although, when there are orchestral tracks on some of the things on Abbey Road, I mean, that's him too. The idea of Abbey Road, stringing the songs together on side 2, he had a hand in.
And the idea of getting that electric harpsichord sound, doubling the guitar on Because, I think is just a masterstroke that almost makes that track without that timbre of this otherworldly, like a ghostly sound from the 18th century. You can't put your finger on it, but there's something unusual that Martin brought to that, and it's an intricate guitar part, but what Lennon plays on that is amazing, and to think that Martin had the ear to say, oh, I'll play along with that, and then it's just the perfect sound.
Things in the middle, like In My Life, it's sort of doing the slow down, take the piano solo and speeding it up. I've never thought it sounded like a harpsichord. Did you ever think it sounded like a harpsichord? Everyone describes it as a harpsichord, but
Sort of a tinny piano.
yeah. In fact, everyone describes it as an Elizabethan harpsichord. Elizabethans didn't really have harpsichords.
So the thing with that effect, George you'd slow the tape down, put the piano on, which is playing at half speed, and you play an octave down. And when you play the tape back at normal speed, it sounds like a music box at times, almost that kind of thing. George loved that, and he started to put it on every record that he did. And eventually there was another band he produced that was also managed by Brian Epstein, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. They used to purposely tune their guitars up out of tune so that he could not put the half-speed piano on.
I never understood as a layman why, if you play something at half the speed and then play it back at twice the speed, why it should sound any different from doing it at normal speed in the first place. What actually is the difference?
Well, the octave is one pitch. If you have two pitches an octave apart, the upper one is vibrating twice as fast as the lower one. So if you record the low pitch and then play it twice as fast, all the frequencies are double. And so all the pitches will be...
But that just puts it in the octave higher. It doesn't explain the complete change in sound.
Oh, the timbre.
Yeah.
Well, it's everything is quicker. So the attack is quicker, the decay is quicker. So it changes the envelope of the sound. It changes the life of the sound. Okay. Sort of like I've got a Mellotron example to show, which I brought in to show some of the influence the Beatles had on other artists. And the Mellotron was this really ungainly instrument that amounted to having, it was a keyboard instrument, and you would play a keyboard, but the keyboard would activate tapes that would play across tape heads. And so you'd have tapes of flutes or violins or choirs or whatever on this Mellotron. And it produced the sound, the tonal quality of the instrument, but it wouldn't give you the attacks and the decays of the instrument. So you would hear just the sustaining part without hearing it. So it sounded otherworldly. It sounded, backwards. So, most famously, it appears as the introduction to Strawberry Fields Forever, which sounds like maybe otherworldly flutes or backwards flutes. It's just the flute as it was recorded on tape, like a sampler that's played on a keyboard on the Mellotron. So I'll play that, and then I'll play a little bit of Yes's Roundabout, so you can hear how another band would say, "Oh, the Beatles did this. Let's do that in our song." So here, first, Strawberry Fields.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to.
So it sounds like flutes, but not like flutes playing what flutes sound like. So in Roundabout, now we're going to hear just a little clip that starts with an electric organ, but then the Mellotron comes in. I'll give you a downbeat when you can hear the Mellotron come in.
Mountains come out of the sky, they stand there, waiting before my love, I'll be there.
So I think Rick Whitman has a little bit of Strawberry Fields playing in his ear while he's playing that.
Rick was the first English session musician to own the Mellotron, and he was called in to do Space Oddity purely because Gus Dudgeon liked the sound of that and wanted to use it on the song.
They really were the most ripped off band in the time, weren't they? I mean, much as they took from other people for their own creativity, everybody took from the Beatles. Because it was just so
It wasn't just mercenary. I mean, you wanted to be the Beatles. I was no performing musician, but how many people remember seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in February '64? Yeah, a bunch of people. I mean, for me, it was a life-changing event. That's when I saw that and I said, I'm going to be a musician. And so you would want to do things that sounded like them. I mean, that's what musicians do. And yet there's definitely financial gain if you can do it really well. But everybody, or many people, did want to sound like the Beatles.
Yeah. The use of instruments on Beatles recordings is another interesting subject, isn't it? Because they didn't just stick to 3 guitars and drums for very long. They very quickly began to explore other ideas. Ken, do you remember any particular instances of them bringing in unusual instruments? And you obviously had the difficulty of miking it up and getting a sound from it.
I remember more taking normal instruments and trying to make them sound different.
Oh, well, that's a difference as well.
Right.
Yes.
And as an engineer, learning what I was doing was perfect because I could use completely the wrong mic, put it in completely the wrong place, do everything wrong on the board, and there was as much chance of them coming up and saying, "Oh, that sounds like crap," as them coming up and saying, "Oh, that sounds like crap, but we love it." So it was perfect. But no, I remember George coming in with the sitar and Norman Smith having to record it for Norwegian Wood. Was Norwegian Wood?
Yes.
And him not knowing what to do with it. That was the first time a pop engineer got to record a sitar at Abbey Road. It was amazing.
Yeah.
No. Had things coming in all the time.
Yeah. Perpetually interested in new sounds. Yeah. You have an example, don't you, Walt, of tone pedal guitar?
Yes. Okay. This is one of my favorite finds. That George Harrison used this a tone control pedal in February 1965 on the songs "I Need You" and "Yes It Is," and for moments you can hear it deep in "Ticket to Ride." I've always wondered where that came from, and when they talked about it, they would say, "Oh, we tried to get that effect with John turning the knob on George's guitar while he was playing," and I think it's in "Babies in Black" that they're actually trying to do that. But they got this pedal that work. And the story is that there was another Liverpool band called the Remo Four that had this fantastic guitarist named Colin Mann.